got a bunch that's a little bit different.
Hey guys, I almost never do this, but I'm about to do part 2 of a fascinating story that I heard last week. Last week, I introduced you as my guests to Bobby Gunn, the bare knuckle fighter. But this week, I get a chance to talk to Stayton Bonner, the guy who was willing to put his entire career on the line to go follow Bobby around and say, the world needs to know who this guy is, and leave a lucrative career as a journalist to go write the book Bare Knuckle. You're going to be blown away by what you hear from him. So I am super excited to introduce you to the author of the book, Bare Knuckle, my guest on this episode of Unbeatable, Stayton Bonner.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Stayton, thank you so much for joining me on this episode, part 2 episode of the Unbeatable podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
For everybody who missed last week's episode, I am blown away by this guy's story, man. I was so impressed. Every moment that I was talking to Bobby, I was more and more impressed with him. Anybody who's listening or watching our episode right now, as soon as we're done, go back and watch last week's episode because we're going to talk about Bobby a lot today. But man, I wouldn't know who Bobby is. I would have no idea about this guy's story if it wasn't for you. So I am fascinated with how a guy who wears size 13 Italian leather shoes and used to write for GQ Men's Fashion follows around a bare knuckle fighter in some of the seedy underground and, back alleys and under overpasses, and chronicles this guy's lifestyle, man. Like I gotta hear this story of what this was like for you.
Yeah, so trying to figure it out myself. In all my years as a journalist, look, I've just never come across a story as amazing as this. I mean, Bobby Gunn has a life unlike any story I had ever heard. It's a true underdog tale.
It's incredible, man.
Rocky, a guy who overcame an abusive childhood that seems medieval, frankly, and went on to become a champion boxer, a legend in the underground, and he did so to get money to put his 7-year-old daughter through private school. That story just struck me immediately. I was working at GQ magazine. I was a writer. This was in 2012. I heard about Gunn and a bare knuckle fight that had been held on a reservation in Arizona. Reached out
where it's a native reservation. So basically anything goes out there, right?
Exactly. So the way the fight world is set up is there's no NFL or MLB. Each state has its own boxing commission and deems what is acceptable or not for fighting. And bare knuckle was seen as seedy, and no one was safe. So there was a fight on tribal land in 2011 that Gunn was the victorious winner in that. I was said, yeah, would you want to come to an underground fight? We'll be in touch. I was at the office. One day I get a text, just had an address, said this thing's going to kick off in a few hours if you want to be here.
Because this is the world of underground fighting. Like, this is totally illegal in most places. So there's no way that we can give you all of the details because the FBI will be there if we do. That's what we're talking about right now.
This is a nationwide circuit that's gone on for, decades, got hundreds of years. If you look at the history, you just got to know. I mean, typically it's people involved around boxing gym culture, and they'll know about it and be able to feed fighters into these circuits that are often funded by organized crime. There is a lot of military overlap. A lot of Marines who were introduced to the sport saw Marines fight, and different veterans. And it's a brotherhood in that same way that resonates with the members of the military I've spoken to on why they do this. One guy was a CPA, a former Marine, a father.
I love it.
He was doing tax, but he missed the military, and he had some PTSD challenges coming back, and going to a Costco kind of freaked him out. And he said the thing I liked about the bare knuckle was the underground, the brotherhood, and combat, and it really is. So I think when I first went to my first fight, it was the people I met. Again, I was given a text that said, "Come meet here in a few hours." I went to an undisclosed location. I don't include cities or specific locales in the book, as was requested. I was then given another address. Basically, it was a gym that was closed in repair. I go into a parking lot and I see Bobby Gunn walking out. It was lightly raining. He had a black T-shirt and a baseball bat slung over his shoulder, which he said he brought for protection at the.
Oh, I love it.
I then met David Feldman, who was a promoter at the time in MMA and boxing. He was a former fighter himself. He told me if I ever put his name in print connected with this, I'd never write
He'll
again.
kill you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's since gone on to found the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, the fastest rising combat sport in the world at the moment, valued roughly around $400 million. Bobby Gunn was an integral part of doing that launch. But that day, I saw a Hell's Angel fight a Marine in a back out alley near this gym. There was a small group of people betting money on it. I remember one person turning to me and saying, "This shit's cool because it's illegal." It's hard to argue with that. It was definitely an atmosphere and an adrenaline rush. What I remember was the sound of skin on skin. It's a very unique, palpable, visceral noise. These were quick fights, over very fast, but it was an exciting rush. And that was my introduction to the sport. But what really captivated me again, I think, was Bobby himself, who such an inherently decent person trying to survive and improve his family amid the most dire and extreme circumstances.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can really back this language up, but I think I might have a man crush on this guy. I have been around some of the toughest people on the planet.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking when I was talking to Bobby last week, I was in the United States Army in the Ranger Regiment in one of the premier fighting units on the planet before the UFC got its start, and we would regularly get in fights with each other. And I mean, this was part of like unit competitions. And then the UFC started, and literally my buddies all flocked to the UFC. I had more than a few buddies that were in UFC 1, 2, and 3. And that were just in there getting after it because at that time, everything and anything goes in the UFC. And then the UFC took hold in my unit, and my unit got really, really, gravitated towards the UFC because it just connected. But what really, really moved me last week was hearing Bobby's heart, seeing just how tender this guy's heart is. And I said it last week, but it bears repeating for those that missed last week's episode. I know 100 guys like Bobby that are really as tough as nails, but on the inside, they are so tender, especially when it comes to their friends and their family, and they would do anything for their friends or their family. And Bobby is one of those guys, and he literally became for me last week like a real life Cinderella man, the famous Russell Crowe movie.
Absolutely.
He became that for me. And I wouldn't have that story if it wasn't for you, dude. So look what I have in my hands right here. I, hot off the press, got a smoking hot copy of Bare Knuckle, your first book. And we're going to talk a lot about this book. So anybody who's driving right now, we're going to talk about this. But if you're watching on YouTube, man, I'm just going to tell you, you got to get this book. But I want to go back to the start in journalism, man. This is a brutal industry, dog eat dog industry. How does a kid from New Mexico end up writing for Rolling Stone and meeting people like Sir Paul McCartney and rubbing shoulders with, world changers? Talk us through kind of your journalistic, career before we get to you putting it all on the line to get this book into print.
Yeah, no, thanks. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico now. Originally from Texas, came up there, riding horses, lived out on a farm, on a lake. Just loved reading. Went to college, University of Texas in
All
Austin.
right. How about those Longhorns?
Hook 'em horns. And then yeah, I got an internship at Texas Monthly, and then an Outside magazine in Santa Fe, and then from there got a job in New York at GQ and lived in New York for 10 years. So yeah, I was, to your point, the gig at GQ was pretty great because the models, basically the clothes that they couldn't wear, those size 13 Italian shoes, that would be auctioned off or given to the plebeian writers there. So I have a lot of really fancy clothes that don't fit me at all. And then I ended up Ms. Journal as a senior editor, and finally at Rolling Stone. I basically loved writing, obviously getting into this, loved storytelling. In addition to my day job of editing, which is sending out other writers, I was always pursuing my own stories, and this one was near and dear to my heart. So when I got the chance to have a book contract on this, I left my job and devoted myself full time to writing. And that's what brought me into the world of Bobby Gunn. I mean, I've been with him for about 12 years. With all these guys, it's been an amazing journey. And this is really a world, a circuit, a code of honor no one knows about, that no one looks into. And the code of honor aspect was fascinating. There was one person I interviewed who was in the 90s, former military person, was then working as a prison guard in a prison in the Southwest near the border of Mexico, was being harassed by an inmate in the prison. And that person was part of the Mexican mafia. And this person told me, the prison guard, the former soldier, said, "Look, the inmates don't really run these prisons. It's really the organized crime." He went to the head of the Mexican mafia in the prison and said, "Look, this guy's just won't respect me at all. I've tried everything. I want to fight him man to man to settle this." After hours, they met in an underground in a basement freezer in the commissary of the prison. This prison guard who also brought he
Who
was
takes his gun off and is about to go toe to toe. Yeah. All right.
and the
I love
Mexican
it.
mafia brought their inmate, and he came in and they went into the vegetable locker or whatever, and he was accompanied by a couple of Aryan Brotherhood guys, having to be white, just to be there, because obviously his fellow prison guards weren't going to watch him. And they went in a fight. He was beating the guy. The prison guard was winning. The inmate pulled a shiv, a knife. Um,
Uh-huh.
at that point, his own people, Mexican mafia people, stepped in and pulled him out. That guy, the prisoner, had disrespected the
Yeah.
rules of a
The
bare
rules of
knuckle
the
fight,
game. Yep.
the code. That guy got beaten severely by his own people, ultimately had to be transferred to another prison. But that prison guard, after that, never had trouble again. And the head of the Mexican mafia in the prison apologized to him. So that just tells you this kind of feudal world. I mean, the people who are inhabiting this are, in the most desperate of circumstances. This is a place where the weak will not survive, and there's a real honor and respect in just straight up old school bare knuckle fighting.
Yeah. I I can't help but think of the whole John Wick franchise when you're having this conversation with me right now. Like there's some rules that you don't transgress at the Continental, right? And
Yeah,
everybody knows the rules at the Continental. And no matter how savage this world is, you don't break these rules at the Continental. And I think a lot of people will hear Bobby's story and it'll kind of turn their stomach a little bit to know that this world exists. But I can see not just the world, but the honor and the respect that guys earn in that world. And they earn it the hard way. And when you've got that kind of respect, man, that respect carries a lot of weight. And nobody enters into that world, because they want to. It's something in life that pushed them in that world. But how you conduct yourself in that world makes all of the difference, man. The fact that you would get invited into that world, like I got to know about this text. Why on earth would somebody send you a text? I got this image of you wearing GQ model clothing and rocking a phone that gets a text that says, it's a Fight Club text basically, that says, hey, be at this place, this undisclosed location at this at this secret time. And you, of all people, getting invited into that world seems really, really rare. Doesn't seem random to me, but seems really, really rare. So I'm
Yeah.
not asking you to divulge any sources. Of course, I won't do that. But how do you get invited into this world?
Well, Bobby was my entree. So, again, I reached out to him on Facebook. He said, "Why don't you come and meet me?" And again, is there with his son. I could see this was a good man. I trusted him. And honestly, it was all about transparency. I mean, whether I'm writing, I've done stories on, cowboys. I've done politics. Got another story on a detective who searches for stolen $1 million cars. Any of these worlds or subcultures I go into, it's very transparent. I mean, I'm not pretending to be anyone I'm not. I am the reporter. I
It's pretty
will.
obvious by the way I dress. I don't fight in this world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And people respect that and people get it. I mean, they asked me not to disclose a detail. I wouldn't disclose a detail. I mean, there was a real trust in this community. Yeah, it was cloistered. It had never been, examined or opened before, but people like to tell their stories, and I wasn't judgmental about it. Again, to me, these were people who were trying to improve themselves. Most people in the fight game come from extreme or difficult circumstances, and that speaks for the history of Bare Knuckle, an early champion in the 1800s in the United States, was an enslaved person, Tom Molyneux, who would fight for his master on plantation bouts in Virginia. He won so much money fighting in these bare knuckle bouts that his master freed him. Tom made his way to New York City, worked as a dock worker, then went over to England and fought the world champion bare knuckle fighter at that time and became a very famous person. Another example is it's deeply rooted in the story of Irish immigration. Uh, it's the Martin Scorsese film Gangs of New York. The Daniel Day-Lewis character Bob the Butcher, that was a real person, and he was a real also champion bare knuckle fighter who parlayed his success with the fisticuffs into a political career. The most famous example of that, as I detail in the book, it's just a fascinating history, is John L. Sullivan, who was the son of Irish immigrants. He was a plumber, teenager, scalding his hands on pipes, did not like doing that trade, uh, and ultimately was walking by a storefront one day, a bar that someone was advertising, can anyone beat this man? And he beat him, and just kept going, became a famous traveling fighter, would put on bouts across the country, became worldwide headlines. Again, a mustachioed, brawny guy who would, drink whiskey and eat raw oysters for breakfast. And, the last fight they did was in the late 1800s. They made global headlines. But at that time, social structures in Victorian era were, trying to be more upright, more righteous. We're seeing a seedy, bloody spectacle of gambling. And so, really, after his famous final fight against Jake Kilrain, it went to the underground and boxing came up, which was much more sanitized to watch. People could fight longer, but it's just like the difference between rugby and NFL. In rugby, there are no pads. It's skin on skin. It's blood. In the NFL, you can watch it with your kids on a Sunday afternoon. It looks fine. But because of those pads and those helmets, the football players and boxers are able to hit each other with much more impact, and it creates more concussions. In rugby, as in bare knuckle, you don't hit as hard because you don't want to break your bone.
You'll break your knuckles, of course.
Yeah. And again, none of this is safe. I'm not saying bare knuckle fighting is safe. It's not. But studies have shown that it does result in less concussions so far. So all of this stuff, the history, the science, the people involved, absolutely fascinating.
Well, what you did in this book is that really blows me away is you bring Bobby's heart out. And I think a lot of people, if they're just listening to our interview, will think of this as a savage sport. And any man that would end up in this world, even if your father pushed you into it at 11 years old, there's something wrong with you. But actually, Bobby is a man of incredible honor and a tender heart. And just like any other parent on the planet, wants something better for his daughter than he grew up with. And nobody would know that world if it wasn't for a guy like you. But Stayton, there's more to you than just that. Because let's be honest, most journalists would get the details, get it in print, would get a big fat contract and an advance from a publisher, and then they would be on to the next story. If you were willing to be in this world for 12 years, it says there's something different about you, man. So why do you stick with Bobby that long? You turn this into, a story, and a story that did well, but why do you stick around with Bobby that long?
One of the first times I met Bobby, I spent the day with him, and he would begin each morning by taking his daughter, Charlene, to the private school she attended, which he paid for with his bare knuckle bouts. I watched him walk his little girl into the school, and he came back in the truck and he told me, it's not the fights that worry me. What scares me the most is that one of my little girl's friend's parents is going to find out who I am, do, and is going to somehow shun my daughter or, not want to play with her, think less of her. Uh, that summarizes Bobby Gunn in a nutshell. He's a Christian man, no drinking, no out, tattoos, would lie prostrate on the floor before fights. He's a family man. He was just such an amazing individual who had overcome such hardships, at 11 years old, sleeping on the floor. They were an itinerant people working day jobs. His dad would go drinking in the bars at night, come home at 2 a.m, wake him up at 11 years old, and whatever motor court they
Time to
were.
go fight.
And say, I brought back this drunk adult man from the bar. He says he can beat you. I've got $300. Says otherwise. Little Bobby Gunn, 11 years old, would, basically put on some clothes and go out. He said, and for a crowd of prostitutes, drunk people, and it'd be the same story. It'd just be some guy look at him. Bobby Gunn himself, as he called himself, I was an opie looking motherfucker. The guy would be like, "Well, this is a kid. What are you doing?"
I can't fight this kid.
And Gunn right between the eyes would just take these guys out methodically. Then they would just be disoriented, kind of throwing haymakers, and this little boy would pick him apart. But for Bobby, it was a lonely, hard existence. He left school at the third grade. Basically no formal education. No siblings. Was isolated in his people, the Irish travelers, who are a group of roaming people, mostly associated with the Brad Pitt character and the Guy Ritchie Snatch. That is an Irish traveler. But he was his was a lonely existence, and he found solace and meaning in fighting, in pro boxing, and then later in bare knuckle. It's a real art form to him and a real form of expression when he really didn't have much. Again, I stayed with it for years, and I have since seen these same guys who I was running around in these illegal back alley bouts, again, have helped create the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. You can go see these events. They're across the country. It's now sanctioned in multiple states as well around the world, and it's valued at over $400 million. As a sports business, it's got that kind of, it's being compared to a next UFC. And I think I've stayed with it that long because if I really write a book, I want to devote a real depth of time to it. And you can't rush a story, so to speak. So I've just followed with it, and it's created an amazing trajectory.
I've done enough interviews. I have talked to enough journalists to know what you're saying right now is highly unusual, very, very rare in journalism today, worldwide, just because of the speed at which stories get sent to press, or so to speak, speed at which stories get published. Nobody stays with something this long. Even the news journals, out there that are writing the long form pieces, they don't stay with a topic as long as you did. and it says a lot about your character, man. But I know a little bit more about your story than the audience does, and it's time for them to hear about it. You put it all on the line for this. I mean, you're working your way up through periodicals, and let's be honest, when you get to Rolling Stone, it doesn't get much bigger than that. You're talking now to people that few journalists will ever get a chance to talk to. You're breaking stories and interviewing people that most journalists can only dream of, and you're willing to put your entire career on the line, literally sleep in your car and give up your career for this story. There's obviously there's a fighter in you too, man. So what makes you say, I'm going all in on this one? Like, this is win or die trying to get your first book into print, because anybody else would just ride off into the sunset when they've reached, the zenith of their career like you did.
Yeah, look, I was a senior editor of Rolling Stone, a world of politicians, celebrities. It was very exciting. I just believed in this story. It was my dream, to see a person like Bobby Gunn who puts it all on the line. I mean, I'm a line inspired me, and so I did. I left my full-time job and devoted myself to writing this book. And I took a chance, and that's what you got to do in life. I mean, look, it was a chance for me to get into journalism in the first place, and to go from Texas
Yeah.
to New Mexico to New York. I didn't know people in New York. I mean, that was a huge leap.
What's a kid from Texas know about New York, right?
I was kind of the guy who was in charge of middle America. That was kind of my expertise.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't used to taking risks, taking leaps. But life's short. You got to go for it.
And this one was a big one, man. You took a big leap with this one.
I did, but I really believed in the story, and I still do. And it's worked out great.
Well, the book has just dropped, and I said this a couple of times last week, and I meant every word of it. So we're going to talk about the book again in just a few, but I really want to see this book go to #1 in the bestseller list. I want to see it because I really want to see Bobby's story make it to the big screen. And I hope that there's a big fat paycheck waiting for you on the other end of it, because you had the courage to enter this world and stay with it long enough to bring Bobby's heart to the pages. And I think it really needs to be to the audiences in the big screen out there, because of the heart behind this guy, not what he's been able to accomplish 73-0, and the, some of the really ugly fights that he's walked away from, but the heart that he's brought to it, and the character of the guy in, that's going bare knuckle against his opponents out there. So you obviously put your heart and soul into this book. Tell me what your hopes are for it in the long run.
Yeah, look, I just hope it sheds light on Bobby's story. I mean, his is just an amazing tale of overcoming adversity, the most dire circumstances of a childhood, to become, it's interesting. He entered pro boxing. His dream was not to be a legendary bare knuckle champion. His dream was to be an Olympic boxer.
Really?
And yeah, and his father had been a former pro wrestler.
Yeah.
This is pre-WWE days, where they would just travel town to town and beat the hell out of each other in front of high school coliseums and bar. His dad was a tough guy, so his dad trained him in 3 disciplines, which was boxing, bare knuckle, and rough and tumble. Boxing, as we all know, pro boxing. Bare knuckle boxing, it's a different science. As I say, you don't want to break your hands. The shots are more surgical, a lot more body shots. He has like a medical knowledge of a person's body, how to hit someone right in the liver, drop them down, how to just pinpoint a vital organ. One guy told me it feels like your ass drops out of your ass. So, and the third is rough and tumble, which means anything goes. That's basically where you're ramming your hand further down a person's throat if they try to bite you. You're biting off a nose. You're ripping out a ball sack. It's brutal. But what Bobby was trained in all these disciplines from childhood. His father hitting him with a baseball bat, wrapped in plastic foam. His father, having him hit his hands repeatedly on wooden floors to touch up. I mean, pretty brutal stuff. It was an abusive childhood. He did that to forge a weapon ultimately trying to monetize his skill. So Bobby became a pro boxer at 15, lied about his age, was in Las Vegas fighting under Carl King,
Wow.
who was Don King's
Yeah.
son, but
Wow.
he never got his due. You know, he was always promised to be the next
Yeah.
major fighter. But what he ended up being used for was a sparring partner for people over twice his
Yeah.
age,
Uh-huh.
uh, who just really beat him to hell. And when his mother got sick with hepatitis C due to a blood transfusion after an accident, and was on her deathbed, Bobby was trying to fight to raise money. They didn't have insurance for surgery, and that's when he really first entered. He'd always been doing underground fights, but it was in Pittsburgh. There was a gym he was working out at, and someone recognized his talent and said, "Hey, you want to make some money tonight?" He came back. He didn't have the 5,000, whatever it was. He lied about it in a duffel bag. Went into this gym after night, bunch of bikers there in different ne'er do wells. If he had lost that fight,
Obviously, lose this fight and you're going to end up dead in the back
yeah,
alley,
you're gonna
right?
be dead in the back alley. But he won. He knocked the guy out, as the 73-0 implies. And there was a booker, Johnny Varelli. A lot of these guys, there was a shady conduit underworld.
Uh-huh.
I mean, a lot of these urban, northeastern. I mean, they're all over, but just basically kind of your non-equinox gyms, uh, and were acted as conduits a lot of times for cherry picking guys to go fight in these underground fights for money. He said, "Hey, you want to make some more money? Here's my number." Bobby's mother died. He became disillusioned with pro boxing, left the sport entirely around age 20, and for the next 10 years fought solely in the underground and, all across the country. Became this legendary figure. This was the 90s, the early aughts. This was before cell phones, so you had to know where one of these things were, but he just was a myth. And what's interesting is he then had his own son, and when his son was growing up, he wanted his son to know he was more than a bare knuckle fighter. So he went back to pro boxing at age 30. An age where the guys are going to farm and they're it up. He went back and he fought global heavyweight famous boxers: Thomas Adamek, James Toney, Roy Jones Jr. And he did it all with such heart. And those guys were fascinated by his grit. I interviewed them, and they were they knew his stories in the underground. It became this funny thing where his fame in the underground then allowed him later to return to pro boxing. He was still doing the underground fights, would go to bouts where there'd be a caged mountain lion in a
Uh-huh.
corner.
Oh
The
my
Russian mob
goodness.
putting gun to his head because he beat their guy and then letting him go. Hell's Angels. I mean, just all sorts of endless crazy stories are described in the book. But he really just showed such heart. It won over even people
Yeah.
in pro boxing. And it was amazing. The one fight against Thomas Adamek, it was in the Prudential Center in New Jersey. Like, Adamek had a whole team, a manager. Bobby Gunn showed up in his pickup truck by himself. He had one guy in his corner, David Feldman, who is the person who ended up founding the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. He had paint on his hands because he'd been painting and paving all day. They did the weigh-in, and he went and fought. He lost, but he stood in that crowd in front of thousands of people, and he just willed that into existence. And, Thomas Mack, I interviewed him. He said the guy's got heart. I mean, you just can't not but believe and want to. He fought Gunn, even though his own people were saying, "Why would you fight this guy?" He's like, "Bobby Gunn sought me out, asked me to a fight, and I respect him."
I
And
respect them that much, right?
that says everything about Gunn.
Yeah. Um, we mentioned this a couple of times last week in the interview with Bobby, but this is really, kind of the real life Fight Club story, right? And the first rule of Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club. And the fact that you get invited to watch it, the fact that you get invited to talk about it, man, that says a lot about you personally. Because as you're saying, this is at the time, before it's become sanctioned, while it's still very dangerous, very seedy, highly illegal, and you're getting an invite to watch this thing kind of front row. I'm using, boxing language here, front row, but also to be able to tell the story, and somehow you earn some trust. And I don't mean just Bobby's trust, but you earn some trust in the entire community, that people were willing to allow you, still protecting some locations and some names, but allow you to put that into print. And Stayton, I've been around a lot of journalists who have wanted to get access to the kind of stories that you just got access to, but they'll never get it in their lifetime. And it's because they burned somebody in the past and no one is willing to trust them again. So something caused Bobby and others to see you and to see, this is a guy that I think I'm finally willing to trust. And if it wasn't for that trust, we wouldn't have this book right here. So you might not even know the answer to this, but what won them over? How was it that you were able to earn trust that most people would never even get the invite to in the first place, let alone to be able to stick around this world for 12 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, I won the trust of Bobby, and he vouched for me, right? I mean, I would not have entered this world if it weren't for his approval and allowing me access. That said, when I got in, again, I think it's always the transparency. I 100% respect everyone. If you take the time and I'm coming into your world, I try to be very respectful. And again, just total clarity. Is it okay if I write about this? Is it okay? Here's who I am. I'm a reporter. There's nothing sneaky or dodgy or, trying to get you. It's really just being totally transparent about what I'm trying to do. And would you like me to share your story? If so, what details are okay? And honestly, that doesn't matter if it's pro boxers or politicians or, other athletes or whatever. I think people just universally understand and respect that honesty. And that's how I try to live.
But let's be honest, man. We're talking about a world that is heavily influenced by biker gangs and by, illegal organizations and the Russian mob. And you're getting now access to the kind of world that most people would never even be able to step into. And it doesn't happen overnight, but man, something earns your way into those kind of circles that frankly the FBI will spend 20 years and millions of dollars trying to get access to what you get access to. That doesn't come easy, it doesn't come natural, and you of all people have to work your way in there. And I know this, the currency in a world like that is trust. You burn somebody one time and man, it's over.
Well, that's a good call. And I mean, look, this has been 12 years in the making. So I think there's something to be said for this wasn't a couple of weekends
Yeah.
and you bang out a story. A lot of this is years and years of relationships, building trust, reporting, going deep. And I think that's a key element too.
I know a lot of journalists. A few journalists are absolutely exceptional writers, but what makes them exceptional writers is their ability to see beyond the surface and see the real story. And the real story is always deep, way deeper than the surface. And obviously, you've done that in the book Bare Knuckle. Um, I really do hope this book goes to number one. It stays at number one for a long time. For Bobby's sake, I hope it goes to the big screen and it makes you a lot of money for the courage that you had to leave a very successful career and live out of your car to make this thing happen. But this isn't the only book, so you've already got another one in the works. I'm not asking you to spill the beans or anything else like that. But what do you think the future looks like for you going forward now that you've kind of stepped away from the from Rolling Stone and the career that you built and entered into an entirely new world, man?
Yeah, look, I love going deep into subcultures, into worlds I didn't know about. It's fun doing the research. And yeah, I'm going to be doing another book. It's a completely different topic. It's not a fight world
Good for you.
or even sports book. But it is another deep dive again on an incredible single person. I like telling stories of a person and seeing what they've done in their life. And it does open up into a world that I didn't know about, and I think others will find interesting. And that's what I just want to keep doing. I mean, you only live once. I do have a passion for storytelling and connecting with people, and seeing where that goes. And that's what bare knuckle is. That's 12 years of following Bobby Gunn, the world champion fighter in the underground, and in sharing this now, his incredible story of what he did with everyone is made it totally worth it.
Well, now I'm going to tell you an open secret that a few other people have heard. You and I wouldn't be doing this conversation today if it wasn't for a reporter that earned some trust. And to this day, I have no idea how this reporter earned some trust. But right after I got back from Somalia, there was a reporter waiting for me in a conference room in the headquarters of the Ranger Regiment. And my commander, my battalion commander, who was kind of leading the Ranger fight over there in Somalia, said, Jeff, you're going to go do an interview with a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Do you know this story, Stanton? Okay, check this out. You'll love this. I'm telling you this because I want the listeners to hear the courage that you put on display and how it fundamentally transformed a lot of people's lives. So I've been in the Army at this point for almost 7 years. I have a personal policy of never talking to reporters. I have been to war and back 3 times and never given one interview in my lifetime because everything that I do is clandestine and the world doesn't get to know. And so my battalion commander, Colonel Danny McKnight, said, Jeff, there's a reporter waiting for you in the conference room. You will do an interview with him this afternoon at so-and-so time. And I said, no, I won't, sir. I don't do interviews. And he said, stop. I don't think you understand. I wasn't asking you. I'm telling you, you will go do an interview with this reporter. So against my will, I was ordered to go do an interview. And I'll just say out loud, thank you, Colonel Danny McKnight, for ordering me to do this interview that I did not want to do. I still didn't I still never wanted to do this one interview. And by the way, I am now 3, 5, 800 interviews later. But I'm in this room and there's a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and there is a very senior intelligence officer from the special operations community in the room at the same time, and me. And he starts asking questions, and literally every question I'm saying, I can't answer that. I can't talk about that. You're not authorized to hear about that. I certainly can't tell people about that. That's very classified. Even people with top secret clearances in the U.S. military don't get this information. And the intelligence officer sitting next to this reporter said, no, Jeff, you can answer this one. No, you can tell him this one. No, you can answer that one too. And I have never before or since seen anyone get the kind of access that Mark Bowden, the reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, got in that interview.
That's great.
Here's the truth for all of the listeners out there, and this is just a word of encouragement for you, buddy. If it wasn't for that interview, I would have never ended up in a series of news articles that was released daily by the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was released online, and it broke the internet. And that news articles became a book called Black Hawk Down, which became a major motion picture, which basically stayed in the studios and #1 on the streaming services forever. And 100% of it, I didn't do anything better. I didn't do anything different than any other guy out there. 100% of the reason why I, made it into the book in the movie Black Hawk Down is because I did an interview. But it's actually because there was finally a reporter for the first and perhaps the only time ever that the special operations community was willing to trust with the true story, a guy by the name of Mark Bowden. And I feel like I'm talking to another Mark Bowden. The fact that you got access to the kind of people and culture, subculture that you got access to, man, I don't know if I would have ever got invited into the world that you got invited into. And that all comes from trust. So
Well, Jeff,
mad respect for you, man.
thank you for sharing that story. That is an amazing, amazing story. And it's a great compliment. Mark Bowden's obviously a hero. That's also a testament to you and your talent. And you're right. I mean, look,
It's his ability to tell a story, man, not me. Yeah. His ability to tell a story, just like yours.
To clarify, when I would be reporting and traveling, I would sometimes sleep in my car. I was never living in my car,
sure,
but that is the kind of commitment to a story. And I don't know what it is, but I bet Mark Bowden, I've never met him, but I would assume it's a similar trait where for whatever reason, I mean, I just get really passionate about it and I want to keep going. And you just know in your gut when something's really good. Black Hawk Down, obviously, an amazing, amazing story. And yeah, that kind of tenacity is required. I think that kind of tenacity is to succeed is true for any endeavor or any profession or any life. I mean, even what you're doing now with Unbeatable, doesn't matter if you're laying bricks or you're an ER
Yeah,
surgeon or whatever it is.
totally agree.
I think it's that same type of drive and commitment, and you just got to go all in on it in life
Yeah,
if you're really
agree
passionate about what
completely.
you're doing. And I think that's the case here.
Yeah, you definitely got to go all in. And if you're not willing to go all in, then just don't go at all. And Bobby's
Yeah,
story personifies that to a T. But your
100%.
ability to put that story into print also personifies that. So let's land the airplane with this, man. We talked about the book a lot last week. I'm going to go back and talk about it again. It's out now in all of the, the major sites, but tell everybody where they can get it. Tell everybody why they need to get it. And then I'm going to end this episode with information on exactly how to get it again. But tell everybody about the book. There it is for everybody who's watching on YouTube, Bare Knuckle. I'm going to let you do this part, man. Let everybody know why this book needs to go to number 1 on the bestseller list.
Yeah, look, Bobby Gunn, 50 years old now. His life story, his literal blood and sweat are on the pages of this. It's just an amazing, amazing tale. If you want to find out why I was inspired to devote 12 years of my life to this book, go to Amazon, pick it up. Bare Knuckle, Bobby Gunn, 73-0 undefeated. A dad, a dream, a fight like you've never seen. I think his story deserves to be told as widely as possible. And it's also fascinating because this actually is. You can go see Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship any weekend now in cities across the country. This is the story of how that started. Bobby Gunn. There would be no BKFC
Yeah.
if it were not for Bobby Gunn and his partnership with David Feldman. It's just an amazing underdog story that'll truly inspire.
Well, I'll tell the audience one more time. I would not be doing part 2 of this episode if it wasn't for the guy that you introduced me to last week, Stanton. When I got a chance to meet Bobby, and all of that is just because you got this story out there for the world to hear. So thank you, man. Thank you for the chance to meet that guy, and thanks for the chance to sit down and talk to you about your blood and sweat and tears that you put in this book.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for sharing your story. It's amazing.
Absolutely. We'll see you around. Just like I said last week, I meant it. Would you help me make this book go to number 1 on the bestseller list? I was so blown away by who Bobby is, by how tough he is, but by how tender his heart is, that I really think the world needs to know about this guy. And if this book climbs the charts, maybe it will become a major motion picture. So I told everybody last week, go ahead and get a copy. And I'm going to say it one more time. Go out to Amazon, buy a copy of this book, Bare Knuckle, the Bobby Gunn story, written by my guest, Stayton Bonner. And I want you to go ahead and tell your friends about this book. I'm not getting 1 penny off of the book sales in this. I just want this story to get out there because I want people to know how much Stayton was really willing to put on the line to get this story out there. And more than that, I want people to know about how incredible Bobby is. If you missed last week's episode, please go back and listen to it. You'll be blown away by how tough and how tender this guy is. He is automatically become a guy that I have mad respect for. So Bobby, thank you for last week's interview, and Stayton, thank you for this week's interview. But more importantly, thanks for helping get this story out there. Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you haven't picked up a copy of it yet, go get the Bare Knuckle book on Amazon. But I also want to just invite you, why don't you stay connected to us? Why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe on YouTube? Why don't you follow us on social media? Just search for @Unbeatable Podcast and go ahead and find guys out there like Belford Williams, who is our fan of the week this week. And Belford, I just want to say thank you for staying in touch with the Unbeatable audience. Thank you for being part of the greatest podcast fans out there. And if you're not already a part of the Unbeatable Army, why don't you go ahead and sign up? It's totally free. I'll send you content directly to your inbox. We won't spam you. We won't send you any junk. I'm not going to put you on anybody's mailing list, but I'll just send you content that'll keep you motivated throughout the week. If you want to be part of that mailing list, go over to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for joining me for this episode. See you right back here next week with another amazing guest. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.